Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I am thrilled to be here with you this afternoon. This is Better Together, TNVR and Public Health with Dr. Bob Weedon. My name is Brianna Lovell-Myers, and I am the Executive Director of United Spay Alliance. United Spay Alliance is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting affordable, accessible, and timely spay-neuter services. We are all things spay-neuter, and we often say that spay-neuter is public health for pets. And so it fits right in with the topic of today's webinar for sure. I am joined today by Kristen Petrie here, our technical tabby on loan from the Community Cats podcast. And so if you are having any technical issues and you want to raise the red flag, you can go ahead and do so by dropping a note into the questions box. And we are going to do our best to assist you. I know that we've had an update to GoToWebinar, so it might look a little bit different if you've been using this with us here for the past, however many years we've been using GoToWebinar. So it looks a little different, and that's okay. Just drop those questions through the questions box, and we'll make sure that we help you if we can. And speaking of that questions box, that's going to be your main point of communication to submit anything to us. If it's a question that either I or Kristen can answer, we'll do our best to do that. Or if it's a question for Dr. Weedon here today, then we will queue those up for the end of the presentation. Your questions box is going to be the place to do that. So let's go ahead and get some practice with it. Okay, let's use that questions box. If you answer this for me, if your pet could text you, what's the first thing they would say? So go ahead and plop your answers into the questions box. More food. I hear that. Feed me. See, that was my thought too. I thought everyone's going to be saying that they want food. I'm hungry. My bowl is empty. Extra dinner, please. And this goes for your community cats or, whoever is out there that is maybe an unlikely source for a text message. Clean my litter box. Treats, please. I like that. Yeah, I think mine would be like, I swear you didn't feed me already. Second breakfast. I think my cat is like a hobbit. They want to eat 6 times a day. All right. There you go. I think it looks like we are all using the right questions box. So that's the place to get in touch with us. So anything comes up today, that's where you're going to do it. All right. So a couple notes before we dive in here. I do want to just thank the Community Cats podcast for their support in putting together these webinars. We are thrilled to be working in partnership with them. And if you have not heard of the Community Cats podcast, you need to go run and check it out. It's an incredible resource which goes well beyond just a weekly podcast. It's truly an educational hub for anyone who's looking to turn their passion for cats into action. They have monthly TNVR certification workshops to surrender prevention workshops. So if you're interested in surrender prevention, they actually have a webinar happening tomorrow. And then they have an array of conferences, one-day events on topics ranging from feline leukemia to behavior and everything in between. So they truly have something for everyone. And so if Community Cats interest you, go check them out at communitycatspodcast.com. All right, and a few other housekeeping notes. We talked about the questions box. Again, if you are having any technical issues, Kristen is here to help, our technical tabby. My IT support lies in turn it off, turn it on again. And so that's like my golden rule is if something's not working, then for you here today, that would mean logging out and logging back in to see if that resolves your issue. After that, I'm going to have to tag in Kristen because that's about all I got for you. But there's my sage advice. And then the handouts. So if you look in your GoToWebinar toolbar, you should see a spot for handouts. And there you're going to see 3 different PDFs. Those are for you. Feel free to download, share, whatever you might like to do. But that is going to have a copy of the slideshow presentation. And so no worries about having to screenshot or take extensive notes as you're listening today. And I am sorry, my notes just went away. There we go. And so we have the quick links for United Spay Alliance. And so you might hear me talk about some different programs, different things we have happening. And so that quick links document is going to be a great resource for you to just follow along and find out more information about the work we're doing. And then, of course, an about document if you want to learn more about United Spay Alliance. And then one of our most frequently asked questions, is this webinar being recorded? And the answer is yes. And so you will all receive a rough cut of today's presentation in a follow-up email from GoToWebinar. And then we will also have a more edited recording available on our website, in our webinar library, and on our YouTube channel at United Spay Alliance. And so this is being recorded. It'll be available after January 21st. All right. Now, again, quickly, a couple announcements because I want to give a shout out to the annual online CAT conference happening on January 25th to 26th, presented by the Community Cats podcast. So this is a weekend-long conference focused on community cats and TNVR. I'm excited to be presenting a workshop on behalf of United Spay Alliance and the work that we're doing and how that plugs into TNVR programs, especially through the Community Cats Grants program. So I'll be there at the online CAT conference, and I hope you will too. Speaking of which, the Community Cats Grants program is the next deadline is coming up. The next application deadline is March 31st. And so this is a matching grant opportunity that we administer through United Spay Alliance. It's geared toward grassroots organizations to support the spay neuter of community cats. And so if that piques your interest, I am hosting an application 101 style webinar to help answer some of the most frequently asked questions about the grants process, about the application. You can join me there on March 18th. And finally, just a quick plug for Feline Fix by 5. February is our annual awareness month where we're making an extra concerted effort to get the word out about the best time to spay and neuter our kittens, which is before they are 5 months old. You can find more information on Feline Fix by 5 at felinefixby5.org. And again, you'll find a bunch of quick links to a lot of the things I mentioned in your quick links document. I'll put some links into the chat for you a little later. But first, I do want to run just a couple polls. So we're going to have some poll questions in our presentation, and I want to make sure we get some practice. So I'm going to launch this one. Can you tell me now, where are you joining us from today? So here's where you actually get to click on the screen and let us know where you're coming from. I'll give you a few more seconds to get some practice with that. Looking good, looking good. All right. About 65% of the votes are in. I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1, end and share results. All right, I think you can see this. And so we have, let's see, we have about 17% of folks from the Northeast. We have the Southeast representing our largest contingent, hello, at 32%. The Midwest at 24%. Out in the western part of the country at 17%. And then outside the U.S. at 10%. That's exciting. Hello to the 4 folks who said they are outside the United States. All right, let's do, okay, this is a good one. All right, how are we feeling? What's our current energy level? All right, are we fully charged? Feeling good? Could use a boost? Running on fumes? All right, get those votes in. Let's see, about 65% are in. I'm going to go ahead and end and share results. All right, only 4 of you said fully charged. So shout out to you guys who are feeling ready to go. Another handful of folks, 37% are feeling pretty good, but it looks like the majority of us could use a little boost. And so it is 2 p.m. I know it's about time for my afternoon coffee. I don't know about y'all. Running on fumes. Oh, and what's energy? The 2 of you that said, what's energy? I feel that. I can feel that. All right. And just one more. I just want to drive the point home. All right. So this is just a fun one because why not? We're here to have fun as we learn. If you could have one superpower, what would it be? Flying, invisibility, teleportation, talking to animals, time travel, or if it's something completely different, go ahead and drop it in the questions box. Just a little something fun to make sure we know how these polls are working. Ooh, I like these results. All right, ready and done. All right, so we got 11% said flying. We got 7% invisibility. Ooh, about a quarter of you said teleportation. And our biggest one, not unexpected, talking to animals. And then another 8 of you said time travel. So very cool. All right. So there we go. That's how the polls work. You're going to get a couple more of those throughout the presentation today. So I thank you all for participating. You'll see that again. So just please do give us your answers as we go along. It just makes it a little more engaging for us to know a little bit more about you as we dig into these presentations. All right, so I am going to give you just a little heads up before I introduce our presenter. And so for today's presentation, I will be turning off my webcam. We are going to keep the webcams off throughout the presentation itself, so you will only be able to see the slides. And then I will invite Dr. Weedon at the end of the presentation. He and I will both turn our webcams back on for the Q&A session. So just to let you all know that nothing's wrong, you're just not going to see any webcams while the slides are going. That way you can just focus on the slide content, and then we'll get into the Q&A at the end. All right, so that's about enough out of me. Let's get into it. I will introduce you now to your presenter for today, Dr. Bob Weedon. Dr. Weedon is a community cat and high-quality, high-volume spay-neuter surgeon at Paws Plus Veterinary in Lakeland, Florida. He's the former medical director and high-quality, high-volume spay-neuter surgeon with the Animal Rescue Coalition in Sarasota, Florida, and previously served as a clinical assistant professor at the University of Illinois, where he trained veterinary students in high-quality, high-volume spay-neuter techniques. Dr. Weedon also instructs veterinarians through his consulting company, SNP, or Spay Neuter Instructional Program. A dedicated advocate for pet overpopulation solutions, Dr. Weedon is a member of the Veterinary Shortage Task Force here at United Spay Alliance. He is also involved with other organizations like Alley Cat Allies and serves on the board of directors for the Alliance for Contraception in Cats and Dogs, or ACC&D. Dr. Weedon holds degrees from Purdue University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Dr. Weedon, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Bree, and thanks to United Spay Alliance and Community Cats Podcast for hosting this, and thanks, Kristen, for providing the technical support. But yeah, we're going to start out with our next slide is actually a poll question. So we'd like to get an idea of the audience here and whether or not you're actively involved in community cat management. We'll see what whether you're a veterinarian or a vet tech performing surgery, an animal control officer, trapper, colony caregiver, or just unaffiliated with TNVR.
And it looks like we have about half of folks reporting, so I'll leave it up for a few more seconds.
Okay.
Go ahead and click on that. And then we're going to end. Ready, and all right.
That's interesting. 68% trapper or colony caretaker, 20% veterinarian or veterinary technician. One animal control officer, thank you for being here. Sometimes TNVR programs are in conflict with animal control, and it's nice to have animal control people here learning more about TNVR. Okay, and just 4 people, I guess, who just didn't have anything better to do. I'm sure there are probably some of my friends that I shamed into attending today. So, all right, Kristen, let's go to the next slide. So you're probably familiar with the term TNR, and even Bree in her introductory comments, she referred to TNVR, and I have been advocating for this term for several years now. Why? The V stands for Vaccinate, which emphasizes the public health aspect of TNVR programs, including vaccinating for rabies as a means of protecting the health of the public. Incorporating the public health component of TNVR programs engages a whole new group of stakeholders, the public health community, in addition to the animal welfare community, in support of humane sterilization of community cats. And this is important for individuals who are trying to get their municipalities or their communities to support TNVR. It's not just about the well-being of the cats, but also how these programs can indeed protect the health of the public. Next slide. So we're all aware of the growing body of evidence indicating that TNVR is not only effective at reducing community cat numbers, but that such reductions are sustainable over extended periods. Here's a figure from a paper done by my friend and colleague, Peter Wolf, showing an 85% decline in the number of cats on the University of Central Florida campus as a result of a long-term TNVR program. Next. In a study published in the Veterinary Journal in 2014, Levy et al. Reported that high-impact TNVR combined with the adoption of socialized cats and nuisance resolution counseling for residents is an effective tool for reducing shelter cat intake. As you can see from these graphs, annual per capita community cat trap, neuter, vaccinate, return surgeries in the target area A increased significantly during the 2 study years, years 1 and 2. This was accompanied by a significant decrease in shelter cat intake and euthanasia. In the non-target area B, annual TNVR surgeries remained at a baseline rate, and shelter cat intake and euthanasia did not change significantly. Per capita results are reported as cats per 1,000 residents, and the asterisk is interpreted as significantly different than the mean plus or minus 2 standard deviations of 5 pretreatment years. Now, this is a topic for a whole nother webinar, but the point of this is that with sufficient application intensity, TNVR can indeed reduce both shelter intake and shelter euthanasia. Next. This is a diagram that my friend and colleague Peter Wolf uses to describe the relationship between animal welfare and public health. Historically, animal welfare and public health have often been in conflict, with life-saving efforts seen as compromising public health. However, there's a major shift taking place now. Today, many communities have adopted progressive policies and practices that effectively address both public health and animal welfare concerns. For example, it hasn't been so long ago that the National Animal Control Association changed their name to National Animal Care and Control Association. And recently, shelter medicine is the second most popular area of interest for students entering vet schools nationally. Next. So a Venn diagram uses overlapping circles to illustrate the similarities and differences and relationships between concepts, ideas, categories, or groups. Similarities between groups are represented in the overlapping portions of the circles, while differences are represented in the non-overlapping portions of the circles. Bullet. Here is one of my favorite explanations of a Venn diagram based on the U2 song With or Without You, where the lyrics say, with or without you, I can't live with or without you. Next. I prefer to look at the relationship between animal welfare and public health in the context of a Venn diagram. Here you can see there are some overlaps between the two disciplines. Bullet, notably, rabies prevention, and what we're going to talk about today, bullet, TNVR, and how it can benefit both sides of our Venn diagram. Next. I prefer to look at the relationship between, I like to think of TNVR as a slide rule. Who amongst us knows what a slide rule is? I used one in high school. I guess that tells you how old I am. It worked well, but was a little cumbersome to carry around and to use. My freshman year of undergrad, my first year of college, the first pocket calculator came out. While the slide rule still worked, the pocket calculator was more convenient and faster. Bullet. Imagine being the slide rule manufacturer the day the pocket calculator came out. Bullet. TNVR is like a slide rule. Something better will come along, but until that time, it's better than doing nothing. Bullet, or next slide, sorry. Yeah, TNVR is the best public policy for community cats. It reduces shelter intake and euthanasia, bullet, reduces complaint calls to municipalities, saves taxpayer money. It's supported by more than 70% of the American public. And as we're going to learn today, it protects the health of domestic animals and people. Probably the most notable attack on TNVR is the 2016 book Cat Wars, The Devastating Consequences of a Cuddly Killer. According to Mara, who since 2019 is the Dean of Georgetown University's Earth Commons Institute for the Environment and Sustainability, and a professor of biology and environment, who had previously been with the Smithsonian Institution's Conservation Biology Institute since 1999 and ran its Migratory Bird Center, outdoor cats are, quote, unrelenting killers and cauldrons of disease, unquote, whose quote unquote devastating consequences must be dealt with by eradication in the name of biodiversity. Quote, from a conservation ecology perspective, the most desirable solution seems to be clear. Remove all free-ranging cats from the landscape by any means necessary, unquote. Since when did killing one species in the name of another ever make any sense? Recently, opponents of TNVR programs have focused on two public health issues, rabies and toxoplasmosis, in their efforts to scare people regarding the apparent threats to these diseases posed by feral and free-roaming cats. We're going to discuss these two diseases today and demonstrate why TNVR programs actually protect people in their communities from these threats. Next. Every year, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention publishes rabies surveillance in the United States during the previous year. This comprehensive document lists the numbers and percentages of wild and domestic animals diagnosed with rabies. It also gives guidance for what is considered exposure. The figures shown represent annual surveillance data from 2022, the latest year for which it's available. So in 2022, there were 17,406 cats tested for rabies, of which 222, or 1.3%, were confirmed rabid. So this is really in line with the mean percentage during the previous 5 years, which was 1.3%, with a 95% confidence interval of 1.1 to 1.5%. It varies year to year, up and down a little bit, but it stays pretty constant at this level. Next. During 2018, antemortem samples from 23 human patients in 17 states and U.S. territories suspected of having rabies were submitted to the CDC for laboratory diagnostic testing, of which 13%, were confirmed to be positive. Nowhere does it list the cat as a source of exposure for a person acquiring rabies during 2018. And that's the last year that for which reporting exists. So that brings us to our next poll question. When was the last documented case of human rabies attributed to exposure from a cat? And your choices are 2024, 2005, 1995, or 1975. Let's see what you think here. Pretty good. All right, Kristen, I think we can close it. It's 49% said 1975, 41% said 1995. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll give you the answer. As a matter of fact, the last documented case of human rabies from exposure to a rabid cat was in 1975. This according to two different documents, one published in the American Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association, another Journal of Neuropathology and Experimental Neurology. 1975, it's been a long time since a human has acquired rabies from a cat. But the threat is still there. Next slide, please. The latest CDC document shows the distribution of major rabies virus variants in the US and Puerto Rico during the period 2014 to 2018. And I really like this format. It's very graphic, and it shows what stands out to me anyway is the blob of green along the eastern seaboard. Well, that's the eastern raccoon rabies virus variant. Next. Now, this is the older format. This was the 2020 document, rabies surveillance document published by the CDC. You can see this graph is not quite as pretty as the one I just showed you, but I'm showing you this because next, in the older version, they also showed a map of reported cases of rabies by county in the previous year. And you can see here reported cases of rabies in raccoons. Look at the cluster along the eastern seaboard. Next. And this is in the same document. This is the map of the reported cases of cats. Next. Now look at them side by side. You notice anything? Sure you do. Most of the rabid cats were reported from states where the raccoon rabies virus variant was considered enzootic. Next. As a matter of fact, it's interesting to note that over 50% of the rabid cats were reported from states where the raccoon rabies virus variant was considered enzootic. And you can see here, Pennsylvania led the list with 47, followed by Virginia, New Jersey, and Georgia. These are all states where the eastern raccoon rabies virus variant is enzootic. Next. So I want to reiterate, emphasizing the public health aspect of TNVR programs. We're vaccinating against rabies as a means of protecting the health of the public. And one of my take-home messages from this presentation is vaccinating community cats creates a barrier to the disease between wildlife and domestic animals and people. Next. An important concept to understand is herd immunity. You probably remember hearing about it during the COVID pandemic. Herd immunity is a form of indirect protection from infectious disease that occurs when a large percentage of a population has become immune to an infection, thereby providing a measure of protection for individuals who are not immune. Individuals who are immune to a disease act as a barrier in the spread of the disease, slowing or preventing the transmission of disease to others. Next. These diagrams illustrate the concept of herd immunity and illustrate how rabies could spread in a susceptible colony of feral cats if each infected animal were exposed to 2 other cats. The blue dot represents an unvaccinated infected animal. The white dot represents a susceptible but uninfected animal. And the orange dot represents an immune cat who will not pass the infection to others. In the absence of herd immunity on the left side of the diagram, you see that the number of cases doubles each disease generation. We see that in the presence of 50% herd immunity, the number of cases, blue dots, remains constant. That's how herd immunity works. Next. So one of the problems that we encounter is that animal control agencies will continue to trap community cats even after they've been spayed or neutered and vaccinated. What happens if 2 vaccinated cats, shown in orange, are trapped and removed and subsequently replaced with susceptible cats? Next. These diagrams illustrate how trap and removal of previously vaccinated cats will actually increase the susceptible population of cats. Bullet times 2. If 2 vaccinated cats, orange dots, are trapped and removed and replaced with susceptible cats, then the number of rabid cats in the colony skyrockets. Bullet, 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 bullet. Next slide, please. There's published evidence in support of this. Fisher et al. Published an article in JAMA entitled Response of Feral Cats to Vaccination at the Time of Neutering. This article showed that prior to vaccination, some cats had protective serum antibody titers, but only 3% of them had antibodies to rabies virus. Next. Notably, following vaccination for rabies, 98% of the cats had protective serum antiviral antibodies titers. Next. Their conclusions were that feral cats appeared to have an excellent immune response following vaccination at the time of neutering. Some veterinarians don't like to vaccinate at the time of surgery because they fear that the immune response will be lessened due to stress. This study shows that not to be the case. Next. They further concluded that incorporation of vaccination into trap, neuter, return programs is likely to protect the health of individual cats and possibly reduce the disease burden in the community. Hence, TNVR. Next. They also concluded that vaccination of feral cats at the time of neutering may protect them for much of their remaining life, because immunity that develops following vaccination has been shown to persist for a minimum of 3 to 7 years in most cats. Next. Now, one caveat. Cats should be retrapped if possible and boosted for rabies according to guidelines established by the American Association of Feline Practitioners. Also, many states have laws regarding rabies vaccination, and as veterinarians, we cannot arbitrarily ignore or alter those. Next. This is why we are advocating that all TNVR programs include the V. Not only are we preventing cats from reproducing, but we're building a barrier to a disease that will protect domestic animals and people. Next. Another disease that Mara brings up is toxoplasmosis. Mara says in Cat Wars, quote, "It is becoming increasingly clear that toxoplasmosis is a significant zoonotic disease, perhaps one of the most significant, that impacts humans globally. And it emerges primarily from outdoor domestic cats," unquote. Yeah, well, maybe not so much. We're going to look a little more closely at the organism and its life cycle. And hint, I'm going to show you how TNVR programs can prevent the spread of toxoplasmosis. But first, next slide, another poll question. So Mara would have you believe that these cats are shedding organisms all over willy-nilly. So the question I have is, how long do these cats shed the T. gondii organism? Your choices are for life, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years. And if you don't know, take a guess.
Looks like we have about half of folks reporting, so we'll wait
Yeah,
for a couple more to get their votes in.
well, that's a pretty good representation, I think, Bree. And I'm impressed. You guys seem to know a fair bit about toxoplasmosis. So let's go to the next slide. The life cycle of toxoplasmosis is very complex, but the cat is the definitive host of the organism, and the organism is shed in their feces for only a short period of time, 1 to 3 weeks, once in a cat's lifetime. I'm going to say that again. The organism is shed in their feces for a short period of time, 1 to 3 weeks, once in a cat's lifetime. Most cats are infected at a young age when they start to hunt and consume an infected rodent. Next. Mara would have you believe that cats are out there shedding toxoplasmosis organisms constantly, and as a result, pose a threat to people and pets, which is why he's been quoted as saying that we need to, quote, "remove all free-ranging cats from the landscape by any means necessary," unquote. That isn't going to work, folks. Nor will it solve the problem of toxoplasmosis, nor is it humane. First of all, there's no, in capital letters, way that we will ever remove all free-ranging cats, consider this. Preventing kittens from being born will decrease the amount of T. gondii organisms in the environment. This is why TNVR programs are so effective at preventing toxoplasmosis. By sterilizing community cats, these young cats are never born and therefore are unable to shed the T. gondii organism. Next. This is from the textbook Infectious Disease of the Dog and Cat by Craig Green. And it has been said by many obstetricians over time that, oh, you're pregnant, get rid of your cat because you don't want to uh, to acquire this disease from the cat. And that's so wrong. It's so, it's really important to understand that these cats, they become infected from carnivorous behavior soon after weaning and shed oocysts for only short periods under 3 weeks thereafter, once in their lifetime. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Dr. Green's textbook, ingestion of undercooked meat or contamination of uncooked foods by cutting boards used to prepare raw meat is a common source of toxoplasma infection. Next. As a matter of fact, in the textbook Handbook of Zoonoses Identification and Treatment, Identification and Prevention, Colville and Berryhill say, quote, cats have gotten a bad rap about how they transmit toxoplasmosis to humans and how they cause spontaneous abortion in women and blindness and mental retardation in newborn and older children. While it is true that cats are the only definitive host for the infective stage of the toxoplasma organism, they are not the most common source of human infection. The most efficient way to get toxoplasmosis from a cat is to eat the cat undercooked. That's from a veterinary textbook. Next. And again, there's substantial scientific evidence that when properly applied, TNVR has been shown to help control/reduce the population of free-roaming cats. Next. And some take-home messages from today, folks. Feral cats appear to have excellent immune response following vaccination at the time of neutering. Incorporation of vaccination into trap neuter return programs is likely to protect the health of individual cats and possibly reduce disease burden in the community. And TNVR programs prevent the birth of kittens who, as they grow, start to prey on rodents where they acquire the T. gondii organism. If those kittens are never born, they will never be able to shed the organism. TNVR not only reduces reproduction, but it also protects the health of the public. Next. Okay, our final poll question. We got about 15 minutes left. I want to save time for questions. But our final poll question, and this is after we do this poll, I'm going to give you some hot off the press data that hasn't even been published yet, but it will be published soon. But I'm curious as to how many of you vaccinate kittens that are less than 12 weeks of age. That's the vaccine label minimum for rabies. And the choices are all the time, some of the time, know if they can be diverted to foster/adopt or never. And the reason I'm asking this question is that A lot of progressive TNVR programs will divert these young kittens to foster for socialization and subsequent adoption, which is a great thing if they have the resources. If they don't have those resources, these kittens get vaccinated and then returned back to the colony. Now, critics of TNVR programs will say, but that's under the label minimum age. You don't know that it works. Next slide. And they're right. We don't, or we didn't have data. There's never been a peer reviewed scientific study to demonstrate efficacy until now. We recently completed a pilot study where 10 kittens less than 12 weeks of age, as determined by their weight, less than 3 pounds, and their teeth, no eruption of incisor teeth, were vaccinated for rabies. Bullet. We drew blood for rabies titers pre-vaccination, and bullet, none of them had detectable antibody levels. Bullet. All 10 kittens were sterilized and vaccinated for rabies. Bullet. We repeated the titers 28 days after vaccination. Bullet. All of them had titers significantly above the 0.5 international unit per milliliter level considered protective. Bullet. The average was 8.8 international units per milliliter, and the range was 1.9 to greater than 13 international units per milliliter. We intend to publish these results in a peer-reviewed journal, so stay tuned. Bullet. Our conclusion is that vaccinating these kittens is indeed effective. Given the fact that this may be the only rabies vaccine that kitten ever receives, the practice should be encouraged. And one other thing I want to mention before we open it up for questions, Bree, when she was introducing me, mentioned that I'm on the board of directors of the Alliance for Contraception in Cats and Dogs. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of what ACC&D is, but I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go to the ACC&D website. It's acc-d.org, and to learn a little bit. The ACC&D is an organization that is dedicated to helping develop and promote the use of non-surgical forms of contraception. Our mission is to advance non-surgical sterilants and contraceptives for cats and dogs and to promote their global accessibility. Imagine what we could do if we only had to give these community cats an injection to sterilize them. You know, right now, a large-scale TNVR clinic might sterilize 100 cats in a day, having several surgeons, doing surgery. Imagine how many cats we could sterilize if we only had to give them an injection. So these are some really cutting edge things, folks. The vaccination data now showing that rabies vaccine in kittens under 12 weeks of age is indeed effective, and also the developing of a non-surgical sterilant to humanely and safely sterilize community cats. I think you're going to see some really great things coming down the pipe. So with that, Kristen, if you want to go to the last slide, I have my contact information on there. Should you have a question, there's my email address, and and a little joke. And I think we can open it up for questions now. So I will turn my camera on.
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Dr. Weedon.
Yeah. Well, did I say something wrong, Kristen? acc-d.org. Did I say something wrong? I
No,
saw a
I think
little.
she was.
Nope, I typed the wrong thing in, so that was on me. Sorry.
And I want
Kristen's been
everybody to
handy in the chat.
everybody to see what my sweatshirt says today.
Sorry, Emily. I was petting a cat.
Okay. So let's open it up for questions. We got about 10 minutes.
Yeah. So, okay, just a reminder, everyone, go ahead and submit your questions in the questions box. We did get a couple in as we were going.
Okay.
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So I know you posted all those maps from the CDC and about rabies testing. And so I was just wondering if you knew the answer to this. What criteria does the CDC use to test cats for rabies? Do you know how that process works? Like where the data comes from?
Yeah, it's they don't. I mean, the testing methodology they use is pretty standard. It's the gold standard for diagnosing rabies. The immunohistochemistry um, section on part of the brain, and the criteria whether or not to test, if I'm understanding the question correctly, that's determined by the submitting organization, like an animal control authority. But typically, they will test an animal that has bitten a human and cannot be quarantined for a 10-day period. And the 10-day quarantine comes um, from the fact that it's a known biological fact that if the animal's shedding virus in its saliva at the time of the bite, it will show clinical signs of rabies within 10 days, usually much sooner than that. So if the animal then at the end of a 10-day quarantine is not showing signs of rabies, then we're very confident in saying that it was not shedding virus in the saliva at the time of the bite. Now, some animals can't be quarantined. Maybe a feral cat that just it would be inhumane to quarantine that animal for 10 days in a cage because they're not used to that. Or the animal, say it was hit by a car and a good Samaritan was trying to help and it bit the good Samaritan, but then subsequently died. Then those animals should be tested for rabies by the CDC and or a local lab. But it is very expensive to test for rabies. So oftentimes, it's less expensive to quarantine an animal for that 10-day period. And that's not to be confused with an exposure quarantine, which is totally different. If an animal is exposed to a rabid or potentially rabid animal, then and it's never been vaccinated, the recommendation now is to go ahead and vaccinate the animal and then quarantine it for 4 months to ensure it doesn't develop rabies. So I hope that answered the question.
No, I think that's a helpful timeline and kind of explanation of how the process works.
Right.
So when we are administering a rabies vaccination to cats through the TNVR programs, how long does immunity from a single rabies vaccination last?
Well, and that's a really good question because the rabies vaccines, there are 1 year and 3 year rabies vaccines on the market. And the way they are determined to be 1 or 3 year is because the animals, the companies, when they're developing them, actually vaccinate test animals, and then they are challenged with virulent rabies vaccine either 1 year or 3 years post vaccination. And so even the 3 year vaccine, the label says that it should be boosted in a year, and then subsequent vaccines are good for 3 years. But Fisher et al. And there are some other people who have been working on this, notably Ron Schultz at Wisconsin, who recently retired. Um, they they have shown that immunity lasts longer than the label time. And last I read, there was protective immunity out to like 7 years from a 3-year rabies vaccine. But again, we can't change the label. The label says that to vaccinate, booster in a year, and then every 3 years after that. But we know that immunity does indeed last longer. And that's my argument for vaccinating these young kittens, that that may be the only rabies shot they ever get. And that immunity will likely protect them for longer. Ideally, they should be boosted in a year. If a TNVR program has the resources and can retrap these animals and booster them. But many organizations don't have those resources, and that's impractical.
All right. So I do have a follow-up question about the new study that you mentioned
Yes.
in kittens. Were follow-up titer tests done after the initial 28-day test? Were any of the changes in antibodies after that initial post-vaccine titer, or were there any changes in antibodies after that initial post-vaccination titer test? Is it safe to assume protection after 28 days will last long term, like the 3 to 7 years in adults?
Yeah, that's a good question. We chose 28 days because the Compendium of Animal Rabies Prevention and Control says that an animal is not considered currently vaccinated until 28 days post-vaccine, because that's when the peak antibody titer should be detectable. So that's why we chose 28 days. And no, the titers will slowly drop over time. This was just a pilot study with just 10 kittens. Now we're putting together a larger study, actually a case control study, where we'll have control cats that are not vaccinated, that ideally will have no detectable titer prior to vaccine, no detectable titer after not being vaccinated, compared with a group that are vaccinated. And I think we will try to follow those longer. I think we may, ideally, it would be good to titer them at 28 days to show a response, and then maybe like even a year later or 6 months later to show a sustained response. But again, this was just a pilot study. All we were looking for is, did these kittens respond to the rabies vaccine being under the label age? And guess what? We showed that they did respond.
Which is a terrific, I think, data-backed proof, I think, to
Oh
have
yeah,
in our back pocket.
because I've been challenged. Actually, I was in a presentation like this, and it wasn't online. It was a live presentation, and somebody in the audience, when we were talking about this very fact, raised their hand. And I called on them and said, "Well, how do you know it works?" And I'm kind of like, because we do it. There's no data that shows that it was effective.
Mm.
And I think the thinking was, when they chose the 12-week minimum age, is that if the kitten had maternal antibodies, that might actually block the effectiveness of the vaccine. But in this situation, it's highly unlikely that kittens are going to have much, if any, maternal antibodies. I think that was the 3% in Fisher's study. The 3% that had antibodies prior to vaccination were probably maternal antibodies, and that the kittens got from the mother through the colostrum when they first nursed. So yeah, I mean, there was no data that showed that these kittens under 12 weeks of age um, were successfully vaccinated. Well, now we have it.
That's awesome. All right, one last little question, not directly related to rabies, but how long do the FVRCP vaccines last, and do they need to be an annual shot?
Do they need to be what?
An annual
No. In,
vaccine.
in, I'm not a virologist, but I will tell you that I have a 14-year-old cat that I have not given an FVRCP vaccine to since he was like 2 years of age, because he's an indoor only cat. And immunity, again, if you read that paper from uh, uh, the Fisher et al. Paper that I cited, they showed immunity persists. I think the longest they went out was 7 years. But I have read other things and had conversations with other clinicians that that's very, if they had a series as a kitten or 1 year, 1 year, 2 year, maybe boosters, they are quite likely immune for life.
Good news.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, that takes us to the top of the hour, as they say. And so I want to thank you, Dr. Weedon, for sharing your expertise with us today.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions that I didn't get a chance to answer, there's my email address there. I don't want that showing up on the John Wall at some bar downtown. But if you have a legitimate question, please email me. I'm happy to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I will certainly work to get it for you.
Awesome. And you can always reach out to United Spay Alliance. You just Brianna at unitedspayalliance.org. I will also do my best to find someone who can answer your questions. And so I want to thank everyone who was able to tune in this afternoon. Again, I want to give a shout out to Kristen, our technical tabby in the background, and Community Cats Podcast for their never-ending support of the work that we're doing. So thank you, one and all. I hope you have an excellent day, that you go out and continue to care for those colonies, have successful TNVR programs, and we're here as a resource if you need us. So thanks so much, and we'll catch
Thank
you
you,
next time.
Bree.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Weedon.
Bree. TNVR. Good for you.
All
All right. So
right,
long.
thanks all.